A very good morning to you, Madam First Lady.
Thank you. Good morning
welcome
to you.
to Indonesia.
Thank you.
I take it this is your first time here.
It is my first time, and it's a lovely place. I'm intending to come back.
Very good. I hope you have a pleasant stay here.
Thank you.
We are honored, first of all, to have you speak with us, and so I'll just get right into the questions, if I may. In your advocacy of women in peace, you talk a lot about strengthening the role of women in the family, and after that, how she has to then seek influence in the surroundings, in the immediate surroundings. So, how does this affect peace in society?
If I talk about the family, it's because I'm convinced that the family is the main element in a society. Families are extremely important, and I'm not talking about the nuclear family as much as the extended family. Family has the role of a support group. When you go to the West, they keep telling you, you need to build your own network of support, so in case something goes wrong, medical emergency, financial emergency, whatever, you have people who will help you. In our traditional societies, we have our support network within the extended family. So this is why I think the family is a very important element we need to attend to. And this is why also I'm saying that the woman has to find her place within the family and become an active member of the family, not just a quiet person sitting on the side. And also, when you come to think of it, women really are very important to a family because they have very daily functions where they take care of the family, whether it is they're in charge of the cooking, the laundry, the cleaning, the education of the children, and all that. And unfortunately, because economists don't put a value on that work, and when they calculate the GDP of a country, people think that, well, their work amounts to nothing, to a zero. And that's not true. And we need to start appreciating the role of women in the family. Once the women's role is reinforced, then they can voice their concerns. And usually women act instinctively as peacemakers. If ever there are two brothers that are fighting each other, the woman will come and calm them down and say, this is your brother. Why don't you talk it through? It is very instinctive, and I think that women have a role in calming situations that can turn into much larger conflicts.
That's very true, actually, once you think about it. One other way you help leverage women in society in Afghanistan is by helping launch a state-run women's-only university. Why was this necessary in Afghanistan, and is this something that perhaps can be seen in other countries? Can Indonesia look into this, or how do you see this?
As I was saying in that earlier answer that I gave you, I am for strengthening women.
Right.
And one way of strengthening women is having them facilitating their access to education, because with education they can become more effective in whatever role they want to play. So in situation where some families might not send their daughters to university, if ever that university has both young men and young women, we are denying the young women education if we don't provide them with universities that are women universities. On the other hand, I want to point out that, for example, in the States, there are some extremely good universities that are women only. And so it is not something that has to do with progress or lack of progress. It's just a question of ensuring that everybody has access to higher education.
Well, what does that mean to say that a women's only university is necessary?
Is necessary, so those women who cannot go to, because of their family restrictions, who cannot go to a university that has young men in it, they can get into universities that are only for women. And then the objection of the families are no longer there.
I see. Okay. All right. Let's talk a bit about what you're doing here. Yesterday you had a symposium and you made a keynote speech. And I noted that you've mentioned how you seek, I suppose, best practices or seek to exchange information and best practices with Indonesia. And so one of the things I noted was the rules. And while we have law in place for social conflict management, other items like the sexual violence bill hasn't been touched by the government. It remains, really in the backseat. Based on your experiences in Afghanistan, how important is it to have these kinds of regulations?
It's extremely important to have on the books regulations that protect women. Whether it is for sexual violence, for harassments on the street, or whatever. And actually, in Afghanistan, we do have them. But it's also extremely important to implement those rules. And unfortunately, implementing is a much more difficult process than writing laws that are rightful. So basically, it's much more trying to change the mentality of people. They may have for several years decided that it's okay not to be respectful towards a woman. So you really need to engage them through activities, through advocacy, through examples, maybe through cultural activities like theater plays or TV serials that show how important it is for society to respect its own women.
So not only rules. What about then the lack of rules? Do we still have to?
Yes. It's always good to have the rules because they state what the norm should be.
Right.
But don't expect just because you have the rule that it will be applied.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. I have an assumption I would like you to entertain. So, women are beginning to see greater representation in decision-making roles, but this largely falls within the secular sphere, and even then it remains challenging. So, based on your meetings with the women ulema here or religious figures, women religious figures around the world, is this true? And how should women approach the patriarchy within a religious society?
Afghanistan is also a Muslim country.
Yes.
Actually, in Afghanistan, 99.9% of the population is Muslim. So their non-Muslims are really a very, very small fraction of the society. So we are a very religious society. We do, whenever I start my speeches, I do take the name of God, and I do say Assalamu alaikum. I ask for peace from everybody. But what you're trying to say is whether just the secular action is enough, or do we have to have a religious action? I think they have to be all at the same time.
Okay.
Because these are the tradition of our societies, at least in Afghanistan. It is Islamic tradition is the tradition of Afghanistan. And so we need to take into account the traditions, the religious traditions. At the same time, we need also to realize that not everybody knows this religious tradition.
Right.
Especially like in Indonesia, in Afghanistan, the local language is not Arabic. And the Quran, the Holy Quran, as you know, is written in Arabic and is supposed to be a text that everybody should read. Quran, the word Quran comes from Iqra, which means, and actually the first word of the Quran is Iqra chronologically.
Right.
And it means that every Muslim needs to read the Holy Quran. It's difficult when you don't know Arabic, and so you rely on translations. And sometimes the translations vary. So the ideal thing would be for people to learn Arabic and to read for themselves and find out what's in the Quran. On the other hand, people like the ulama, the women who are knowledgeable scholars of Islam, their role is to bring light to the teachings of the Holy Quran. And it's a very important thing, because if we're saying that we are the disciples of this tradition, we need to know it and know it correctly. And as there are several schools of thought in Islam, we need to decide which school of thought we want to follow.
Yeah. So, I mean, in another, I think taken differently, I suppose.
Yes.
Do we not need women leaders in religion then, in that sense?
Of course we do. We always need women in all spheres of activities,
Right.
because women and men have slightly different approaches to life. It's totally normal, and they complement each other.
Right.
This is why families are composed of women and men. They don't live each one in a bubble. You don't have women in one side and men in the other. So women should be taking part at all levels of societies.
So, right, taking into account what you just said, Indonesia recently had its first ever gathering of Muslim clerics, of ulema, in which they touted gender equality based on the Quran. So a feminist bent, a reading of the Quran, I suppose. How do you think these women should use their role in a country like Indonesia with the largest Muslim population in the world?
I think the Holy Quran speaks for itself. So for these women to point out to all the passages in the Quran where indeed men and women are treated equally is already an indication that men and women are equal. I don't think they are being feminists. I think they're being true to the religion. When all the interpreters up to now have been, not up to now, actually historical, there have been women scholars from the beginning, from the time of the Prophet. So actually they are pointing out to something that is true, that is there in the Quran. And this is where we come to the translations. Sometimes translations don't necessarily emphasize this aspect. And I think the role of the women scholars, ulama, is a very important role to bring truth to what the Holy Quran says. But they don't need to interpret.
Right.
They just need to say, this is what we find in the Quran.
That's true. So perhaps for all the men out there, if you wanted to convey just one message for them to take away, for us to take away, so that peace and equality may prevail in this world of uncertainty, what would that be?
I think what is extremely important is to everybody to understand that men and women complete each other. So you can't have a matriarchy, you can't have a patriarchy. It is really very important that we accept that. As I was saying earlier when we were discussing before, when you have two hands, why do you want to work just with one hand and tie the other hand behind your back? You want to work with both hands because then you can work better, you're stronger, you're more capable of doing things, and you are both working for the future of your children, of your society, and you achieve success much more easily. So I am not for separating men and women. I am, on the contrary, I advocate that both men and women have an important role to play together.
Well, very well said. Thank you, Madam First Lady.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
This is Tama Salim from the Jakarta Post.